bring in Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley. He's an author and historian, and he joins us from Washington. Dr. Tarpley, thank you very much for joining us here on Press TV. This is the third war we're seeing being waged against the Palestinian population of Gaza. We saw Operation Cast Lead, we saw Operation Pillar of Defense, and now Operation Protective Edge. In your capacity as a historian, when you look at the Israeli occupation, the question that arises is why Gaza? What do you think?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a barbaric policy. I think the world has now concluded, or much of the world has concluded, that Netanyahu is a madman and that he's got to be stopped, and that the Israeli Security Cabinet is a collection of people who have lost all touch with reality. I think Netanyahu has been defeated politically in each of the three adventures that you mentioned. The 2006 in Lebanon, a defeat, 2008 in Gaza, and then there's actually another one, I think, about 2 years ago in Gaza, which is similarly a defeat. But now, I think that in terms of world public opinion, U.S. public opinion, he has pushed this so far that I think he's getting a backlash. We can see a backlash here and there, even in the so-called mainstream media, and we've now got this exchange of insults with the U.S. government at the level of personality conflicts. I would say right now, one important issue to raise is the $3.1 billion that the U.S. is giving to Israel every year. I think the American people have to look at those dead babies on television and conclude that they cannot subsidize this kind of mayhem. Again, it's absolutely barbaric. So this has to stop. I think a ceasefire would have to include the end, the absolute unconditional end, not only of the Israeli occupation of Gaza and indeed the West Bank, but as far as Gaza goes, the end of the blockade. The one thing that world public opinion has learned in the last couple of weeks, I think, is that there is a blockade. There is a state of siege. There is this huge prison house where you can't get in, you can't get out, you can't import, export. Fishermen are interfered with and so forth. And that also has to come to an end. However, I think we're also at a point where we have to ask ourselves about international peace and security. So far, the Israeli much-touted Iron Dome system, paid for, of course, by the U.S. taxpayer, seems to be able to shoot down some of the missiles that the Israelis are firing. But what happens if other actors enter this conflict, right? Suppose there are missiles coming from Lebanon. Suppose there are missiles coming from parts of Syria. We don't know. There's a completely chaotic and lawless situation there. I don't think the Israeli Iron Dome would function so well if it had to deal with missiles coming from another direction. If Israel then gets back under rocket fire, given the mentality of this madman Netanyahu, we have to consider the possibility that he might go nuclear in response to this terrible situation. Netanyahu, I think it's clear, has to go. Somebody's got to kick him out of the Israeli government in order to make peace. But my main point is this. In order for this not to turn into World War III, which it certainly can do, we've got to have an international peace conference. The only way I think that a solution to this is going to be implemented is if it's imposed. Certainly Netanyahu, the Israeli political parties, have shown complete contempt for the demand for peace coming from the world community. The Gaza leadership also, I think, has made some serious mistakes along the road. But enough of that. What we need is an international peace conference, some kind of new Geneva conference with, obviously, Iran, with Egypt, with all of the other countries in the region. And I hope if we wanted to find a way to get back to U.S.-Russian cooperation, this might actually be a backdoor to do it, that
right.
there are vital
I'll get to this
interests
in a minute, Mr. Tarpley, Dr. Tarpley. Right now, just a quick reminder to our viewers, you are seeing the skyline of Gaza, live images coming out of from there. The flares are being used by the Israeli military to provide light and cover so that they can attack more locations within the Gaza Strip. Indeed, Dr. Tarpley, as we're seeing the world's public opinion change with regards to Israel, we're seeing the protests are bigger and more heated than ever against Israeli aggressions. We're seeing people really put themselves out to participate in the BDS campaign to ensure that the economic cost to Israel is just as high as the political cost is. However, my question is this, that as we have discussed before here on Press TV, the power of the Zionist lobby, what needs to change for American and other politicians around the world to reflect this public opinion?
Again, I detect perhaps a sea change in U.S. public opinion. And as this current brutal, barbaric phase goes forward, I think we can hopefully look forward to more of that. Now, of course, the U.S. party system is somewhat, it's heavily insulated against public opinion, but things nevertheless might change. I think we owe it to the people that are being bombed tonight not to sit around and say why no progress is possible or why nothing will ever change, but that something can change and something is changing. And again, that seems to be a worldwide shift. I would just say again, if you want to get out of this situation, there's got to be something like the Geneva Accord of 2003 of Yasser Abed Rabo and Yossi Beilin, and people, I think, know what the general outlines are. There are these problems of the right of return and the Israeli settlements. I think these can be finessed through indemnities, through money being paid to people to compensate them for their losses. There's the question of Jerusalem that would have to be finessed. But why don't we talk about the possible solutions? The other question is economic development in the Middle East. We now have a situation where all of these countries have been ruined by war. Syria has now joined the ranks of those ruined by war. Lebanon has certainly been there since 2006 and not before. The Sinai Peninsula is now a war zone. And now with Iraq, of course, this goes without saying, and there are other areas involved. I think the positive direction to get out of it, and the thing that propaganda ought to focus on, is a Marshall Plan for the Middle East, paid for by people. For example, we have a new actor on the world stage, the BRICS Bank. We've got Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, with a $50 billion development bank. Obviously, one of the obvious places to put that into action would be Palestine to begin with, and then regional development beyond that, because this is, of course, the premier political problem that's been around in the world for 10 or 20 years. If this is not done, there's a very grave danger that we'll see the convergence of the Ukrainian crisis. The Ukrainian crisis is more dangerous in some ways because the actors that are likely to clash there are already armed with nuclear weapons. In the case of Gaza and Israel, the nuclear escalation is a little bit more indirect, but it's equally threatening. So these have to be brought to a halt right now. And it seems to me that all persons of goodwill can certainly unite on that platform. And if you're supporting Netanyahu, obviously Netanyahu is the product of this long-term ideological development. But at the same time, let's not kid ourselves. If you could knock him out of the box, somebody else might have a different demagogic political approach and be more amenable to some other method, right? Some kind of a change. And indeed, in Israel, there's been a lot of resistance, right? We've had this no future generation, right? The great crime of Netanyahu in Israeli politics is the impoverishment on the home front. And we've had all these young people saying, we have no future. What they're really saying is, we have no future under Netanyahu's economic policies that he implemented when he was finance minister. So I think there's a significant body of public opinion inside Israel that may reach the point of changing something.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm afraid we've run out of time. That was Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley, author and historian, joining us from